Hello, and welcome to another episode of ClueCon Weekly. I am John Gray, and today I am honored to introduce Bree Hall. She is a developer advocate at HubSpot, and she's going to enlighten us a little bit about React and some of the different components and how she implements them, as well as just developer advocacy. So, Bree, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you, John, so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Likewise, likewise. So in case our listeners live underneath a rock and don't know what React is, can you give us just a little overview of the importance of it, where it kind of fits in, and some of the different components that can be altered to fit some different applications?
Absolutely. So when we think about the web and how we are used to building apps, I think it's important to almost go back a couple of steps. So web apps are typically built with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, where we're using HTML for the structure, CSS for styling, and JavaScript for all of our interactivity. Now, those three components are all you really need to be able to create a web app. But when you start getting into things like state management or keeping track of different parts of your program, or even thinking about reusable pieces that where you don't want to have code duplicated a bunch of different times, that's
Mhm.
where frameworks like React come into place and they make development a lot easier. So in React, we are creating reusable web components to build our different views. So if we think about things like lists, instead of having an HTML structure where we have repeated the list tag a bunch of different times and have all of those stacked inside of our HTML, React allows us to build almost Lego components that we can just reuse and stamp when we need to with a different information. So that's one piece that people really like about using React. And with React, there are also a couple of different other frameworks. Like we have Vue, we have Angular, which are popular as well. And these sort of allow us to do this the same thing, just in a different flavor, almost, if you will.
Yeah. No, I like that you mentioned state management. That's super important, and it helps with a lot of the structure in these modern day applications. But speaking of applications, what have you been working on, or what is something that maybe you're proud of sharing with our audience these days?
Absolutely. So, as a developer advocate, I one of my favorite things actually is that I get to play around with different technologies and I'm always learning. So, right now, I guess that looks like two different things. I'm a developer advocate at HubSpot, and we are currently in the process of trying to get people to understand and see what our UI extensions are. And these extensions are basically full scale web apps that you can put inside of HubSpot CRM, and they really unlock like a different level of customization, if you will. So when I'm teaching, and especially when I'm teaching developers, it's easy to just check out or kind of stick with the typical business use case of things. So I've been trying to push the boundaries a little bit and see how can I make this development into the CRM a little bit more interesting, and how can I relate it to something that people are a little bit more familiar with. So as I'm developing and almost figuring out how we want to extend and how we want to customize the CRM, sometimes it's, well, can I make a game? Is there some way that I can make this teaching lesson fun? And I think it's really important with the rise of AI tools where now people who have the title of developer are not the only people who are creating apps. We have all kinds of people who maybe are business folks, maybe people who have never written a line of code ever before, and they're also able to build these apps too. So I also want to make sure that I'm not just locking in my lessons or teaching people who would consider themselves a developer, but I also want to break down those topics for people who don't have that traditional developer background necessarily.
Definitely. Now, 2 points that you definitely touched on of just building things that make you excited or that you enjoy. I know that that was a lot of how I got into programming. I remember making a application with baseball and statistics based on that. And then when SignalWire released a lot of our AI tools, I made a Dungeons and Dragons Dragon Master, and I ended up using that in order to make guides that were actually business relative and that weren't just fun party tricks, but actually had some sustenance. So I like exactly that. That's one of my biggest pieces of advice to people in getting into programming, to just get excited about it. But the other thing that you mentioned was people who don't have maybe necessarily a technical background are able to get involved. So one thing that I saw on your social media was a comment that you made about, does using AI tools make you a bad programmer? And are we stooping kind of to their level? Or I'd love for you to share with the audience your 2 cents on that, because I think that's a great point of us kind of meeting in the middle between techie people who have studied all this time in order to get to where we're at, but also we're lowering the playing field in order for people who don't necessarily have those backgrounds in order to do that. So, does using AI tools make us a bad programmer, Bree?
Absolutely not. I think it's a multi-layered question. Have you heard of the term vibe coding?
I am full of the vibe coding,
Okay.
100%.
Good. That's one of the fun things about being tech is like you just get these different terms that pop up like every
Mhm.
couple of months. And it's gotten to the point where now when I see a tweet and I'm like, what is this trying to say? I just throw that in ChatGPT and I'm like, please tell me what this person is trying to tell me or what's going on.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but definitely I think the first thing is these tools have made coding and technology more accessible and maybe less intimidating to a group of people who would have never picked up a code editor before or, like at all. Maybe because it felt too intimidating or they felt like they didn't know enough. So being able to use natural language in order to create things lowers that barrier of entry and allows people to start finding those solutions to problems that they have without the overhead of, I don't know necessarily how all of these pieces work together. Now, on the other half of that, people are spinning up like full apps. And while they don't have to have a background in technology or really understand what's going on, I think it really helps. And that's where I think that using AI coding tools actually makes me a better engineer because I get to focus on the things that I really want to focus on. Like, for instance, if you saw that on my channel, it's probably likely that you saw my example was I like styling. So when it comes to the CSS or Tailwind, which is what I'm using these days, I will usually elect to do that part because I feel like it's fun. But if it's a more complex React component, maybe I will use Cursor, which is what I'm currently using now with like Claude Sonnet 3.5 because I really like it for coding. And I will have it scaffold the component for me and all of the business logic and like state management and everything like that. And then I get to style it. So I think it allows me to delegate those tasks that maybe I would spend a little bit more time on, or maybe just like, hey, I don't want to do this. I don't want to worry about it. I'm going to focus on this. I think the other piece that comes into that is whether you would consider yourself a vibe coder from either a technological background or not a technological background. It's important to make sure that however you're coding, your apps are secure, your apps are maintainable, and you still understand like what some of those pieces are. And I think that's where some of it can get lost in translation between like, oh, I've never coded before and now I have this whole app, and then you deploy it and it's like, oh wait, all of your API keys are out there. We can't do that. We can't do that. We got to like use an environment file. We have to use secret. Something has to be done. But that's not something that somebody who may not come from a background in technology might know. So I think there's also like a little bit of a learning curve there as well.
Definitely. No, I like what you mentioned about you focusing your time on the pieces that you enjoy and not the pieces that you don't. And it's funny that you mentioned you enjoy the styling, because that is the part that I dislike the most. I have the ugliest applications, but they work. So that's exactly what I am using Cursor for these days.
Mhm.
And as long as it works, that's basically how I look at it. So I'm glad that we have people like you, Bree, who are actually spending the time to make it look pretty, because mine are the complete opposite of that. And you kind of touched a little bit about using Claude 3.5 with Cursor, but what other tools, or is that the primary tool that you kind of see a lot of developers using these days? I know as a developer advocate, you're kind of pioneering certain tools, and I know that every month we basically get a new one that 10x's what we thought we were doing 10x the month before. But what tools are you kind of using, or maybe is there anything that people should stay clear away from? What are kind of the trends these days, and what have you found success in?
Absolutely. So I know in terms of models, I would say 3. I have 3 in rotation right now. I'm using ChatGPT 4.0 for all of my reasoning, ideation. I use it a lot actually, and it's funny because, my husband will be hanging out around, and then all of a sudden I will just pull out my phone and then just start talking to it. Like, maybe I have an idea and I'm just trying to synthesize like what my thought is and get some sort of like guardrails around it and have ChatGPT pick out the most important parts of what I'm thinking about and then give me actionable steps on what actually needs to be done. So
Yeah.
I use ChatGPT a lot, not just for like work or for coding. I use it in daily life as well. Like I said, I'm also using Claude Sonnet 3.5 for code. I find that I like the code that it generates a lot more than ChatGPT, and I'm also using Gemini now a little bit. I
Mhm.
just recently started using Gemini for like deep research. And Gemini is a little bit verbose for me at the moment, but I think what model you use comes down to what your personal preferences are and how you're using them. So, for instance, if you need something with a little bit more personality, ChatGPT is usually my go to. But when I don't want personality and I just need you to tell me, is my code right or wrong, then Claude and Gemini are going to be where I go to. In terms of like IDEs, I've used VS Code with Copilot. I was using that previously before switching over to Cursor. I have heard of windsurf, and there's been some windsurf news
Yeah.
that I think came out a little bit earlier today, but I have not used it just yet.
Interesting. Yeah, I like playing around with the different tools, and I one of my favorite things to do is the war room. I don't know if you've seen that before, where you get a blind test and then that you throw in a prompt and then you get to decide which one is better. I feel like that's my public service, and that is my volunteering to the technical community. That's the way I give back to the world, is basically just filing which model I think is best. But as you kind of mentioned, there's a different purpose for each kind of model, and each one kind of kicks off its own, unique characteristics that have its own features for it.
Absolutely.
So at HubSpot, what are you guys working on? What are you proud of, or what would you like to kind of promote while we have this platform right here?
Yeah, so we have a lot in the works. I think the thing that I'm mostly working on, so I do a lot of code samples, which is working with like our UI extensions and that extensibility for the CRM. I
Mhm.
believe it was yesterday, it was announced that HubSpot now has an MCP server. So you can do, are you aware of MCP and Model Context Protocol?
Can you elaborate for our audience?
Yeah.
Just to give a little bit. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So I actually learned about this fairly recently, and that's just one of the things again with technology, it just moves so fast. So
Mhm.
we have AI where we chat with our AI friends like ChatGPT, Claude, like we talked about a couple seconds ago. But we also have AI agents. And the difference between using like LLMs in a chat sense versus AI agents is when I'm chatting with ChatGPT, it can tell me how to do something, but an AI agent is going to actually go do that thing for me. So, Model Context Protocol allows these agents to basically like speak to each other. So, I went to an event last week actually where Block showed us how they're using Goose with different AI agents to do all kinds of cool things. To be honest, my mind was blown, which so fun. But this MCP server would allow you to basically automate how you do certain HubSpot tasks, like maybe synthesizing what's going on with a specific record, or I'm trying to think, like summarizing what's going on with like a ticket or any of your deals or anything like that. And it makes that interaction a little bit easier.
That was far better than I could have even imagined articulating the some of those. So thank you so much for that. Uh, my last question is fairly open ended. What have I not asked you about, and what else should we discuss over here? What question have I not asked that you wish I kind of did?
Ooh, that you know what? We're just having a conversation, so I wouldn't say there was
Yeah.
anything that you definitely should have asked me. But usually, when I'm talking like online or anything like that. It's usually like one of two things. I like to talk about content creation because I feel like it's my very fun outlet where I get to show my personality and teach and all of those fun things together. I think code, community, and content are like the three pillars that I like to live by as a developer advocate. And content is really where I get to like bring all of those things together. I get to make the content, which is creative. I get to show coding, which is like one of my loves. And then also the people interaction. Previously, I was a front end engineer. And one of the things that I was missing just a little bit about being an engineer versus being an advocate was that community interaction. So now I get all three of them.
No, I that's so great. I've never heard it articulated in that way, with the three C's. As a solutions architect, I talk almost exclusively with customers. I talk internally, but I feel as though a lot of our developer advocates or our developer experience team isn't able to actually get the feedback from the customers or the people that are using it as often as I am kind of getting it. So I like to relay that almost like a server in a restaurant being like, "Hey, they said that the steak was really good,"
Yeah.
or you're like, "Hey, that guide was killer,"
Yeah.
and I think that there's something that's almost romantic about that, where it's like I made this content and being able to communicate a lot of the ideas in an effective manner that developers are able to understand because we're weird people and the while we're a lot of us are technologically minded, it's very difficult to be communicative, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. So to be able to articulate things and put things from your brain into the techie brain is a miracle itself, and we
It is.
appreciate your service and all that you do. But but Bree, it was a great conversation. I appreciate it so much. How can people find you, or is there anything you want to plug before we wrap this thing up here?
Yeah, you can find me everywhere at Bites of Bree. And then on LinkedIn, you can find me. My name is Bree Hall. So I look forward to connecting.
Great. Thank you so much, Bree. We'll talk
Thank
soon.
you.